It all started when my wife, Renee, thought her affair was a secret she could keep hidden. She assumed I'd never find out, that the lies she wove in the shadows would stay untouched. But one day, I handed her divorce papers with Sheriff by my side, and the moment her eyes met the cold manila envelope, I knew the life we had shared was over. They say marriages die slowly, but ours didn't. It was suffocated, buried beneath the weight of lies, guilt, and the faint scent of perfume that never belonged to me. My name is Caleb. I'm 45, a structural engineer, a father to, and until recently, a husband to Renee. She's 42, an executive at a high-powered advertising agency, where ego and charm are the currency of the land. We met in our early 20s, both full of ambition, blind to what the future would hold. What started as a whirlwind romance, rushed vows, sleepless nights, and diaper runs evolved into something that, at times, felt more like survival than love. It wasn't always perfect, but it was ours, or at least I thought it was. We weathered the storms, career changes, financial stress, the challenges of raising kids, and I thought love would always be enough. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Not when one person decides their needs can only be met elsewhere. I began noticing changes in Renee about 2 years ago. The subtle shifts at first were easy to dismiss, like her not laughing at my jokes anymore. The same ones that used to make her laugh until coffee came out of her nose. She became quieter, colder, more distant. Late-night meetings became more frequent, and the let's-cook-together nights we once enjoyed turned into an afterthought. She started comparing me to Damon, her boss, a man with a Rolex, a trophy wife, and a polished, fake smile. At first, I thought it was just her venting, a bad day at work. But something in me knew better. She began mentioning how Damon always surprised his wife, how he never forgot anniversaries. I brushed it off, told myself I was overthinking. But I wasn't. I tried. I tried harder than I ever had before. I read books on relationships, took her out on spontaneous date nights, bought her flowers for no reason. She called me too much, said I was trying too hard. I asked her what she wanted. She told me, "You should know." I didn't know, but Damon did, and she told him everything. He wasn't just listening. He was answering. One night, I caught her smiling at her phone, laughing like a teenager. When I leaned over to peek, she yanked it away like it was toxic. "What are you doing?" she snapped. I asked what was so funny. She barked, "None of your business." That was the moment the fog lifted. I didn't have proof, but my gut told me everything I needed to know. The next day, I confronted her. She played the victim. Hurt, furious, offended. She even handed over her phone. But by then, the real conversations were happening on a second device I didn't know existed. I wasn't naive. I went full detective mode. I had a friend recover deleted texts, and what I found made my stomach drop. The emojis, the names, the shared moments, it all pointed to Damon, the man who had been offering me marriage advice while he was sleeping with my wife. Still, I waited. I knew confronting her then would only result in lies wrapped in tears. So instead, I reached out to his wife, Camille. Her reaction told me everything. Shock, rage, and a bond formed in the ashes of betrayal. We joined forces, two spouses with nothing left to lose. We tracked, we watched, we gathered evidence. They weren't sneaking around. They were flaunting it. Hotel check-ins, business trips, even in my house, in my home, on my couch. I knew then that this wasn't just an affair. It was a second relationship. We made our plans. The divorce papers were ready, and a showdown was inevitable. We knew they had a weekend booked at a boutique hotel 3 towns over. I went with a sheriff, waited in the lobby, heart colder than stone. She came down in a robe, laughing until she saw me. When she froze, when her expression dropped like someone had cut the power, I knew the end had arrived. I handed her the papers. "You're free to go, Renee, but not with me." She screamed. She cried. She begged. But I didn't look back. Not once. That was the beginning of the end. The hours after that hotel encounter were a blur. I didn't cry, didn't scream. I just drove. Highway lines blurred past, my mind replaying every moment. not betrayal, but the years I'd spent trying to build something that wasn't even real. Back home, I stepped into silence, the kind that doesn't welcome you, but suffocates every corner. Every photo on the walls felt like a lie, like props in a sitcom that wasn't mine anymore. I grabbed a trash bag and began clearing out her side of the closet, not out of anger, but because space was the only thing that made sense. The next morning, Camille called. Adrian, the other betrayed spouse, had reacted just like we expected, denial, then rage, followed by a desperate apology. Camille was done with him. Renee, on the other hand, moved through the aftermath like a ghost. She texted, called, sent voicemails, some apologetic, some gaslighting. She claimed I couldn't possibly understand, that I was predictable. Predictable. A jab. I took it as a compliment. I kept every receipt. Emails, bank transfers, hotel confirmations. The legal battle was swift. Renee's lawyer tried to play the sympathy card, but I was ready. I had the dates, the phone records, everything. No sympathy in the final negotiation. The kids didn't know yet. We had agreed to give them one last peaceful summer before the truth shattered their world. But kids are perceptive. My daughter, 10 going on 40, asked me one night, "Are you and Mom mad at each other?" I didn't lie. I told her things were changing, but that we loved her more than anything. She nodded, then said she already knew something was wrong. Mommy cries a lot when no one can hear. The hardest part wasn't betrayal. It was a realization that everything I had worked for, the marriage, the trust, the routines, was something I had tried to protect alone. Everyone asked me if I was okay. I told them I was fine. I wasn't, but I was free, and I had no idea where that freedom would lead. A few weeks after serving her the papers, Renee started sending long emails, confessions drenched in guilt. She tried to explain everything away, but it wasn't about the why anymore. It was about the impact. I didn't respond, not because I didn't have words, but because they'd already been used up in the years of trying. Camille and I kept in touch. There's a strange bond in sharing the same grief. We spoke about legal proceedings, co-parenting, and the awkwardness of relearning how to sleep alone. My kids, old enough to understand, took the truth in stride. Renee tried to win them back with distractions, gifts, sudden bursts of affection, but I didn't intervene. I wouldn't weaponize my children against her, but I wouldn't let her rewrite the narrative either. One day, my son asked me, "Do you hate Mom?" I told him, "No, but I can't trust her anymore, and trust is everything." He nodded and didn't ask again. Meanwhile, Adrian vanished. A new city, a new job, no traces of his old life with Camille or Renee. He offered one last apology full of metaphor and self-pity. Camille didn't bite. Neither did I. When Renee asked to meet, I agreed. Not for her, but for me. We met at a coffee shop, one we used to love, back when loving each other didn't feel like stepping on landmines. She wore too much makeup, and her hands trembled around her cup. She started with a compliment. Said I looked lighter, like I was free. I told her that's what happens when you stop carrying dead weight. She teared up. "I never meant to hurt you," she said. I almost laughed, not out of spite, but out of disbelief. She still thought that intention could erase impact. "I know," I said, "but you did anyway." We sat in silence for a long moment. "Do you think we could have fixed it?" she asked. "No," I replied, because I was the only one trying. She nodded, slowly, as if the truth was settling into her bones. No grand gestures, no begging, just a quiet, bitter acknowledgement that some things are beyond repair. I paid for my coffee and left her there, sitting in the ruins of a love that had never truly been. Outside, the wind was sharp, but it felt like clarity. Freedom doesn't always come with a bang. Sometimes, it's the absence of needing to explain yourself. Life after destruction is strange. The routine comes back, but it's no longer familiar. I wasn't rebuilding anything. I was creating something new, a life I could finally own. No longer a husband, not yet healed, but unshackled at last. There was a purity in that emptiness, like standing in a house with no walls, feeling the first clean gust of air. I started walking long, quiet walks, not for fitness but for my sanity. I explored neighborhoods I had never noticed before. I saw porch lights left on at noon, toddlers drawing galaxies on sidewalks, dogs barking at nothing but the breeze. And for the first time in years, my mind felt quiet. The kids spent weekends with me now. Pancake Saturdays, backyard campfires, movie nights with too much popcorn and just enough bad jokes. In the end, I realized something that would have once been impossible to believe. I didn't need her to be whole. I was finally learning how to be enough, just as I was. The reality of betrayal hit Caleb in a way he hadn't expected. His wife, Renee, thought her affair was safe, a secret well guarded in the shadows. She was convinced he'd never uncover the truth. But Caleb, a 45-year-old structural engineer, father of two, and man who dedicated himself to preserving the sanctity of his marriage, had other plans. His world had crumbled when he realized that his wife, the woman he'd built a life with, had been shopping for attention elsewhere. After years of silence, complacency, and subtle neglect, the betrayal felt like a sharp knife to the chest. Caleb was no longer the man he once was. He wasn't the one willing to pretend anymore. He'd handed her divorce papers in the cold, sterile lobby of a boutique hotel, with the sheriff by his side, and simply walked away from a marriage that had slowly suffocated under the weight of unspoken secrets and perfume that never belonged to him. It hadn't always been this way. He and Renee had met in their early 20s. Fast love, impulsive promises, and the kind of passion that could only come from youth. They rushed through life together, from sleepless nights to diaper runs, from career shifts to parent-teacher conferences. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. They weathered arguments and celebrated victories, convinced that love would carry them through, even when times were tough. But somewhere along the way, love had become a punchline for Renee. A joke she didn't bother to laugh at anymore. Things changed slowly over time, like an unnoticed leak that turned into a flood. About 2 years ago, Caleb began to notice subtle shifts. Renee, once full of warmth and laughter, had become distant. The little things that once connected them, shared jokes, spontaneous dinners, faded. She compared him to Damon, her boss, a man who had a Rolex on his wrist and a polished smile that made Caleb feel small. At first, he brushed it off, thinking maybe she was just venting. But deep down, Caleb knew something was off. He tried everything to make things right, reading books on relationships, arranging date nights, and even surprising her with flowers. But it was never enough. She told him he was trying too hard, and when he asked her what she wanted, she replied with a simple, "You should know." But Caleb didn't know. Damon did. And as it turned out, Damon wasn't just a confidant. He was the other man. When Caleb stumbled upon the truth, it was like the fog lifted, and the reality of his marriage was laid bare. He didn't confront Renee immediately. He knew better than to face her with raw emotions and no proof. Instead, he became a silent observer, quietly tracking every moment, recovering deleted texts, and piecing together fragments of a broken story. The affair wasn't a fling. It was a second life, one that was paraded around hotels, business trips, and even their own home. And so, Caleb made a plan. He joined forces with Carrera, Damon's wife, a woman who'd been just as blindsided by her husband's betrayal. They tracked, they watched, they shared the pain. When the time came, Caleb took a sheriff to a hotel where Renee and Damon had planned a weekend getaway. He stood there in the lobby, heart heavy with the weight of betrayal, as Renee appeared in a robe, laughing, until she saw him. Her laughter died instantly and her face fell, as if someone had pulled the plug on her entire world. Caleb handed her the papers, told her she was free to go, but not with him. She screamed, she cried, she begged, but Caleb stood firm. The sheriff intervened, and without a second glance, Caleb walked away, leaving her to face the consequences of her choices. In the days that followed, Caleb felt nothing but silence. The kind of silence that filled the spaces in his home where once there was laughter, shared moments, and illusion of love. He went through the motions, clearing out Renee's side of the closet, not out of anger, but because it was the only thing that made sense. There were no emotional outbursts, no tears, just the quiet hum of a life that had ended, and one that was about to begin again. Renee's lawyer tried one last time, claiming she was emotionally distressed, hoping to sway Caleb with sympathy, but Caleb wasn't moved. Every word of their divorce agreement had been earned, measured, and written with precision. When Caleb's daughter, only 10, noticed a change and asked why Renee didn't come to game nights anymore, Caleb didn't lie. He told her that things were changing, but they loved her more than anything. It was a hard conversation, one that his daughter understood in ways no child should have to. The hardest part wasn't betrayal. It was the realization that Caleb had been the only one trying to protect the marriage all along. Renee, on the other hand, couldn't seem to let go. Her late-night voicemails, soaked with guilt and regret, came one after another, but Caleb never answered. He had nothing left to give her. The truth was too clear. She reached out one final time, in person, but when Caleb opened the door, there was no drama. She didn't beg or cry. She simply stood there, exhausted, in the same coat that once belonged to a version of herself she'd left behind. They talked, but Caleb didn't feel the need to argue. The truth was already clear. He had been the only one trying. He told her the kids were doing fine, and when she asked about them, he gave her updates without anger. He no longer needed her validation or her excuses. He had moved on. She hadn't, and as she left, she quietly acknowledged that she wouldn't be able to forgive herself. But Caleb had long since come to terms with the fact that he was better off without her. In the months that followed, Caleb found peace. The pain didn't vanish overnight, but it faded. He started journaling, something he'd once mocked in his younger years. He found solace in the quiet. His kids thrived. His daughter became fascinated with photography, and his son with wild dreams of building robots. Caleb wasn't just surviving anymore. He was rebuilding a life that was his and his alone. He even joined a book club, meeting with strangers who understood loss in their own ways. One night, when asked about a protagonist's response to betrayal, Caleb simply said, "I think sometimes the best revenge is becoming unrecognizable to the people who took you for granted." And for the first time in a long while, he truly believed it. Caleb no longer sought answers from his past. Instead, he focused on what he had gained: resilience, clarity, and peace. He no longer carried the weight of a broken marriage. He carried only the freedom to choose what his life would become.